I knew the smell of that server room better than my own apartment. 10 years of my life were baked into those racks, long nights tracing code through a jungle of logic, only I could navigate, 3 a.m. Slack pings from panicked managers, the quiet satisfaction of fixing a meltdown before anyone upstairs even knew it happened. I'd built the platform from a blank screen and a bad coffee habit, every module, every integration, every workaround to keep billion-dollar contracts from collapsing under their own weight. And for most of that decade, nobody outside the engineering pit even knew my name, unless something broke. Upstairs, the boardroom was a revolving door of executives with shiny resumes and shinier watches, all eager to slap their name on innovations they'd never touched. I'd watch from the corner of quarterly review meetings as the CTO talked about our vision while presenting screenshots of my work without so much as a nod in my direction. They lived for applause. I lived for the quiet hum of a system running perfectly because I'd stayed until sunrise to make it so. There's a strange kind of invisibility that comes with being too competent. When you're the one holding the duct tape and the blueprint, you don't get flowers. You get the privilege of being taken for granted. I didn't expect cake or confetti for keeping our uptime at 99.999%, but I didn't expect to become a ghost either. Sometimes I'd test it, let a minor bug sit for a day just to see who'd notice. They never did, not until it threatened a client. And by the way, since we're talking about the unseen work that keeps the whole damn machine from falling apart, if you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, you're basically my old bosses ignoring me for a decade. 97% of you never click the button. It's free, it helps us keep the lights on, and honestly, it's the one thing in this story you can fix instantly. Anyway, the culture was predictable. Executives gave inspirational speeches about innovation while I kept patching their messes. I remember one winter when a new integration from a strategic partner crashed our payment processing system. The VP of operations announced in an all hands that he personally led the recovery. The truth? He'd called me at midnight, drunk from a networking gala, and slurred, "Fix it, you're the only one who knows where the bodies are buried." By 4 a.m., the system was stable again. By 9 a.m., he was taking credit on a conference call. Still, kept my head down. You don't survive a decade in one company's digital trenches without learning to pick your battles. I figured as long as they signed my paychecks and stayed out of my code, we could keep coexisting, me in the shadows, them in the spotlight. That fragile balance cracked at a quarterly meeting about 18 months ago. I'd just finished quietly overhauling a core module that had been limping along for years, something that, if it had failed, would have cost us millions. I expected not praise exactly, but at least acknowledgement. Instead, halfway through the meeting, my boss clicked to the next slide and said, "And of course, this stuff is all replaceable. We could swap out any of these back-end processes if we needed to." He didn't look at me when he said it. Didn't have to. It landed like a slow punch to the gut, not because I needed his approval, but because it confirmed what I'd been suspecting for years, in their eyes. I wasn't the architect, I was just the labor. And the funny thing about labor is, once you treat it like it's disposable, sometimes it disposes of you first. It started subtly, the way bad weather does, little shifts in the air pressure you don't notice until the storm is already at your door. My calendar began thinning out. Weekly syncs I'd attended for years suddenly weren't relevant to my role. Project updates that used to arrive in my inbox were now whispered about in closed-door huddles I wasn't invited to. Once, I walked into the main conference room for a status meeting, only to find my access badge no longer open the door. Through the glass, I could see my boss gesturing at a diagram I designed, explaining it like he'd birthed it himself. He didn't even make eye contact when he saw me standing there. At first, I told myself it was just reshuffling corporate musical chairs, but the pattern was too familiar. I'd seen it play out with others: isolate, downplay, erase. One by one, the old guard, the ones who'd been here before the big acquisitions, before the IPO, were disappearing. Their work accounts went dark. Their names stopped appearing in company-wide emails. And every time I swiped into the building, I couldn't help noticing the growing stack of deactivated security badges at the front desk, sitting in a little cardboard box like lost pets that no one was coming to claim. Then HR called me in for what they cheerfully labeled an informal chat. The kind where they try to make small talk about your weekend before sliding into words like realignment and role redundancies. I'd been through enough corporate bloodlettings to recognize the choreography. HR rep smiled like she was reading from a script, assuring me there was nothing to worry about while carefully not answering any direct question I asked. I left that room with a knot in my stomach, because nothing to worry about in HR speak is always code for start packing your things. Meanwhile, my boss's behavior shifted from distant to almost rehearsed. In the rare moments we did speak, he was overcompensating, clipped sentences, no eye contact, acting like I was a contractor he barely knew. When he did reference my work, it was in broad, vague terms, as if removing my fingerprints from the company's memory. I realized then that the erasure wasn't just happening, it was already well underway. And yet, under the surface of that creeping dread, there was something else, a strange calm. Because while they were slowly phasing me out, I knew something they didn't. Years ago, after surviving my first close brush with an executive purge, I'd quietly built insurance. Not in the HR paperwork kind of way, in the buried deep in the system kind of way. Protective measures woven so tightly into the platform's architecture that they were practically invisible unless you knew where to look. A failsafe triggered only under one condition, my employee ID being deactivated. Back then, I hadn't thought much about whether I'd ever actually use it. It was just a break glass in case of arrogance measure, my own way of making sure that if the people upstairs ever decided I was replaceable, the system itself might have a different opinion. Now, walking past that little box of dead badges in the lobby, I could almost hear the glass starting to crack. The summons came mid-morning, dropped into my inbox like a polite guillotine. Can you step into conference room 4 at 10:15? HR will be joining us. No subject line, no context. Just the kind of email that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. Conference room 4 was small, too small for anything good to happen in it. Windowless, with that recycled air smell that made you feel like you'd been buried alive. My boss was already inside, leaning back in his chair like a man auditioning for the role of smug executive in a bad Netflix drama. HR sat beside him, perfectly still, hands folded over a leather folder embossed with the company logo. He didn't waste time on preambles. No thank you for your years of service, no half-hearted flattery. Just a slow lean across the table, his cologne mixing with the faint scent of burnt coffee, and a whisper meant to be intimate but dripping with contempt. You were just the labor. The words didn't land like an insult so much as a confirmation, a final, blunt proof of what I'd suspected for years. I didn't see the architect, the strategist, the person who had built the very foundation their salaries stood on. In his eyes, I was just the pair of hands behind the curtain, a tool that had outlived its usefulness. HR took over then, the voice smooth, rehearsed, and deliberately devoid of empathy. This is a formal notification that your position is being eliminated as part of an organizational restructuring. Here is your termination letter. She slid the folder toward me like a blackjack dealer passing a losing hand. Inside, legalese, a severance offer that was insulting even by corporate standards, and a polite reminder to return all company property immediately. I didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, a switch flipped. Not the logic bomb, not yet. Just me, sliding from shock into a kind of icy clarity. Because while they thought they were writing the end of my story here, I knew they were about to trip over the beginning of theirs. The real one. Please collect your personal items and meet a representative from HR in the lobby, she continued. Your badge will remain active until the end of the business day. That was the moment I almost smiled. End of the business day. They'd just given me a time stamp on their own destruction. The failsafe I'd buried years ago wasn't triggered by anger or manual command, it was triggered by the system itself. The moment my employee ID status flipped from active to inactive. When that happened, the bomb would quietly detonate in the deepest layers of the code, dismantling the platform's core functions in a way no one could reverse without my keys. We stood, the choreography smooth. My boss didn't look at me again, just gestured toward the door like I was a delivery driver who'd overstayed their welcome. The HR rep followed me to my desk, hovering as I packed my things into the standard issue cardboard box. I took my time, not because I needed to, but because every stapler and framed photo was another second closer to their end of day. As we walked toward the elevators, she made the mistake of trying to soften the blow. I know this is difficult, she said in that syrupy HR tone, but you'll land on your feet. I kept my voice even. I always do. She didn't hear the second part I only said in my head. You, on the other hand, are about to watch the floor vanish beneath yours. The elevator doors closed, and somewhere in the building, my countdown began. The box felt lighter than it should have, 10 years of my life reduced to a couple of coffee mugs, a framed photo from the one company picnic I didn't skip, and a tangle of old conference lanyards I'd never bothered to throw away. I stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, air conditioning hitting me like a wave. Friday sunlight streamed through the glass doors, catching on the polished tile floor. To anyone watching, it probably looked like a normal exit, just another employee moving on. The receptionist gave me a polite, awkward smile, the kind you give someone when you've already heard the gossip but aren't sure if you should say anything. I nodded back, adjusting the box in my arms, and walked toward the sliding doors. Each step felt deliberate, steady, unhurried. If there was one thing I wasn't going to give them, it was the satisfaction of watching me rush out. Outside, the late morning traffic hummed along. I crossed the plaza, resisting the urge to glance back at the building. In my mind, I could already see the rest of the play unfolding without me. I didn't need to be inside to know exactly what would happen next, because somewhere, back on the 12th floor, an HR specialist was pulling up my profile on their system. She'd confirmed the box had been handed over, that I'd surrendered my badge. She'd scroll to the bottom of my record, click the drop-down menu, and select Deactivate Employee ID. One click. No fireworks, no flashing screens, just a silent handshake deep inside the architecture I'd built. Code that had been sitting there for years, asleep, waiting for that one precise signal, my ID status flipping from active to inactive. The logic bomb didn't announce itself. It didn't crash the system all at once. That would have been too obvious, too easy to trace. Instead, it began a quiet cascade, a removal here, a corruption there. A single missing authentication token that made one microservice unreachable. A dependency flagged as deprecated that suddenly refused to resolve. Functions that looked intact until you tried to use them, only to discover they had nothing underneath. By the time anyone noticed, it wouldn't look like sabotage, it would look like entropy. A system quietly unraveling under its own weight. And without the encryption keys I kept on an offline drive in my apartment, no one, not even the most expensive contractors they could hire, would be able to knit it back together. I reached my car, set the box gently on the passenger seat, and slid behind the wheel. Across the plaza, a man in a suit was rushing into the building, phone pressed to his ear, already looking irritated. I wondered how long it would take before the first critical issue ticket hit the queue. Hours, maybe less. As I pulled out into traffic, I felt that grim electric satisfaction settle in. The platform wasn't theirs anymore, not really. It was back in my hands, in the most literal way possible. They'd spent years pretending I was just the labor. Fine. Today, they could see what the machine looked like without me, and I was going to enjoy every second of their discovery. The first ripple hit Saturday afternoon. A friend still in the company messaged me, nothing dramatic, just a screenshot of a client ticket labeled Payment Gateway Intermittent Failures Urgent. I could picture the scene instantly. A junior engineer frantically combing through logs, middle managers telling them to just restart the service, as if that ever solved anything more complicated than a stuck printer. By Sunday, the ripples had grown teeth. Two more major clients reported issues. One couldn't generate end-of-month invoices. Another's analytics dashboard was spitting out numbers that made no mathematical sense. The status page still showed all systems operational, but I knew that was just the PR band-aid. Inside, the triage had already begun. Monday morning, the dam broke. Customer support lines jammed before 9 a.m. Every available rep pinned under a pile of high-priority tickets from clients who were not in the mood for "we're looking into it" excuses. Some of those contracts had clauses that started the penalty clock ticking the moment downtime was acknowledged. I'd written some of those clauses myself. Well, I'd advised on the technical language, back when they still thought my opinion mattered. Middle managers scrambled like headless chickens, convinced it was a server issue. I could practically hear the phrases echoing through the office. Failover, load balancer, roll it back to Friday's build. None of it would help. The beauty of the failsafe was that it didn't break anything directly. It simply made the system incapable of putting itself back together. Components that used to talk now spoke in different dialects. Functions were technically there, but like hollowed-out shells, empty on the inside. The engineers tore through the repositories looking for changes, but there weren't any. Not in the commits they could see. The trigger wasn't in the code they touched day to day. It was buried deeper, in a layer most of them didn't even realize existed. I designed it that way on purpose, the same way you'd hide a master key inside the foundation of a building, rather than in the lobby's lost and found. I sat on my couch through all of this, coffee mug in hand, reading the news and scrolling through forums where clients were starting to vent publicly. Some speculated about hacking attempts, others blamed another AWS outage, because blaming Amazon was easier than admitting they had no clue what was wrong. What none of them knew, and what the company would discover all too soon, was that there was a way to restore everything. But it wasn't in their disaster recovery plan, or their backups, or the cloud. The only way back ran through a single offline drive, kept in a locked case in my apartment closet. And without my unique encryption keys I'd never stored anywhere near their network, the entire $400 million platform was just an expensive skeleton. I took another sip of coffee, flipped the page of the book I'd been reading, and smiled to myself. This wasn't chaos to me. This was order, finally restored. By Wednesday morning, the gloves were off. The polite, carefully worded service interruption notices had turned into red-letter critical outage warnings splashed across the platform's public status page. The green checkmarks that had reassured investors for years were gone, replaced by a wall of angry red icons. Most of the core services were listed as degraded or offline, and the ones still showing as operational were basically cosmetic, little lights left on in a house with no electricity. Major clients, the ones who'd tolerated a weekend of excuses, had reached their breaking point. Legal departments started firing off formal breach of contract notices. A few went straight for the jugular, threatening lawsuits that would claw back years of revenue. And these weren't empty threats. I knew those contracts inside and out. The penalty clauses were brutal, designed to keep us safe from vendor failures. Now, they were being used against the company like a weapon turned back on its owner. The executives were in full survival mode. Emergency all-hands meetings popped up like weeds, half pep talk, half damage control. The CEO tried to look confident on camera, but the strain was obvious, tie loosened, eyes darting to someone off-screen feeding him lines. "We're doing everything in our power to restore full functionality," he promised, over and over, like repetition could make it true. Down in the trenches, rumors were spreading faster than the outages. Sabotage was the word most whispered, usually in Slack DMs or hallway conversations. Some thought it was a cyber attack from a competitor. Others swore it was an inside job. The engineering teams tore through every log, ran every scan, rolled back every deployment they could, but the deeper they dug, the stranger it looked, like the system had just hollowed out. And that was the point. The failsafe wasn't built to destroy, it was built to remove. To peel away the living tissue of the platform and leave nothing behind but an inert frame. You could stare at it all day and think you had the pieces to fix it, but without the missing connective tissue, my encrypted modules, you were just wiring dead nerves. Somewhere between Monday's panic and Wednesday's collapse, the power dynamic shifted. I wasn't the fired employee anymore. In their eyes, I'd gone from disposable to irreplaceable, from background noise to the one variable they couldn't solve for. Every hour that passed made my absence louder. I didn't need to be in the building for them to feel my presence. It was in every frozen process, every client call that ended in a threat, every panicked conversation that ended with, "Does anyone know where she is?" I spent that afternoon in a coffee shop across town, reading the paper, my phone face down on the table. Not because I didn't expect it to ring, but because I knew it eventually would. And when it did, I wanted to let it buzz for a long, long time. By Thursday, the cracks in their united front weren't cracks anymore, they were fissures. Someone inside started leaking emails to a couple of industry reporters, and the messages spread online like wildfire. Directors were snapping at each other in reply-all chains, throwing blame around like confetti at a funeral. The CTO kept circling back to the same excuse in every thread: legacy code. According to him, the entire mess was due to outdated architecture that predates my tenure. Funny thing, though, my name never appeared. Not once. Publicly, they were pretending I didn't exist, like erasing me could somehow erase the problem. But privately, oh, I knew better. That kind of coordinated omission wasn't accidental, it was self-preservation. Naming me would invite questions they weren't ready to answer, questions about why the person who built their backbone was no longer in the building. Then there was the CFO's internal report, the one that didn't leak to the press yet. A friend still on the inside forwarded me a snippet. The numbers were obscene. Between contract breaches, SLA penalties, and the projected loss of two major clients, they were staring down hundreds of millions in damages. And that was before factoring in the cost of emergency consultants, who were billing them six figures a week just to confirm what they already knew. They were dead in the water without me. I'll admit, there was a stab of bittersweetness in all this. I thought of the engineers still grinding away in that glass tower, people who'd pulled all-nighters with me, who didn't deserve to get caught in the fallout. They were probably burning themselves out right now, chasing a fix that didn't exist. They didn't know I'd made sure of that, not to punish them, but to protect what I'd built from the very people who had decided I was just the labor. And then came the screenshot. An internal Slack channel, timestamped just after midnight, Alex B. "Does anyone know where she kept the backups?" Marie S. "Which she?" Alex B. "You know who." David L. "Oh, three little dots, no follow-up, no answer." I stared at it for a long moment, coffee cooling in my hand, the hum of the city outside my apartment window. It wasn't gloating I felt, at least not entirely. It was something sharper, cleaner. Vindication. The proof that all their bluster, all their arrogance had led them right here, to this moment where the only path forward ran through me. And I wasn't moving an inch until I decided it was time. It was close to midnight when my phone lit up on the nightstand, the vibration breaking the quiet hum of the apartment. No caller ID this time, just a text, short enough to fit in the preview banner without unlocking the screen. "Please tell me you have a backup." No high, no corporate polish, not even the usual attempts at authority. Just raw, stripped-down desperation. And the sender? The CEO himself. The same man who, 3 years earlier, had shaken my hand at a holiday party without recognizing my face. Now, at God knows what hour, he was reaching out directly like I was the only number left in the world that mattered. I didn't respond, not yet. I put the phone face down again and went back to what I'd been doing, half watching an old movie, sipping tea gone lukewarm. Let him wait. Every minute without an answer was a minute the board was pacing. CTO was sweating, the CFO was calculating just how much deeper the hole could get before it swallowed them whole. 2 hours later, another buzz. "We can work something out, name your terms." Still, I stayed silent. I knew what was happening in their war room right now, the realization that every avenue had been exhausted. The consultants had nothing. The engineers were running in circles. The clients were lining up with legal threats. The status page was still bleeding red, and the person who could stop it, me, wasn't even in the building anymore. Finally, around 3 a.m., I unlocked the phone. I typed 2 words, "Do I?" That was it. No promises, no threats, just a question sharp enough to make him stop breathing for a second. Because it flipped the frame entirely, it wasn't about whether I'd give them a backup. It was about whether one even existed without me. I imagined him staring at that message, realizing that for the first time since this company had gone public, he wasn't in control. The balance of power had shifted completely. In every legal document, every system architecture diagram, every offsite recovery plan, my name might have been buried in fine print, but now it was carved into the reality of their survival. By sunrise, I knew what would happen. They'd have to acknowledge it, maybe not publicly, but internally. In the only way that mattered, admitting that I alone could bring the platform back. That all their titles, their corner offices, their shareholder clout meant nothing without the one person they'd shoved out the door with a cardboard box. And for the first time in years, I slept like a rock. We met in the back corner of a quiet hotel lounge, the kind of place where business deals happen under the cover of clinking glasses and soft jazz. I'd chosen it deliberately, neutral ground, far from the glass tower where they'd thought they could erase me. The CEO arrived first, but barely. He looked like a man who'd been living in boardrooms for a week, tie askew, skin sallow under the warm lighting, eyes ringed with the kind of exhaustion you can't hide with makeup or money. He stood when I approached, extending a hand like we were old friends. I let it hang there for a beat before shaking it, just enough to be polite. We sat. No pleasantries. He went straight for it. "We'll bring you back. Full salary, retention bonus, equity package, whatever you want." His voice was low, urgent, like he was afraid someone might overhear how badly he needed me. I let him speak, listing numbers and benefits, each offer sweeter than the last. It was almost impressive how quickly a man could pivot from just the labor to indispensable asset. But I wasn't here for flattery or desperation. I was here for control. And he finally ran out of breath. I reached into my bag and slid a folder across the table. Inside was a document I'd spent the last 2 days perfecting with my lawyer. No vague promises, no handshake deals. This was ironclad. Full autonomy over the platform I'd built, final say on all technical decisions, my own budget, my own team, and an explicit clause preventing anyone from altering my work without my approval. Permanent. Non-negotiable. He skimmed the first page, and I watched the color drain from his face as he realized what I was asking for wasn't just reinstatement, it was sovereignty. He could hire me back, yes, but under terms that made me untouchable. A fortress in the middle of his empire with my name on the gate. "This is aggressive," he said finally, as if the word might make me soften. "No," I corrected him, leaning forward. "This is insurance, for me, for the platform, and if you sign it. For you." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of it settling between us. He glanced toward the folder again, then up at me. "So the backup," I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Backup's ready, once my signature's on your payroll again. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit him."